The phone rings, and on the other end of the line is a worried relative asking if you've seen their missing loved one. You tell them you haven't and hang up the phone and continue on with your day. Then the phone rings again and again and again. It seems like the same relative keeps calling over and over again, but every time you answer, it's the same person on the other end. But something is off. And once you listen closely to the voice on the other line, you realize that it's not the same person calling every time. Each caller has a different loved one who has gone missing, and each missing person has something in common. They all boarded at the same house, and now they seem to have vanished without a trace. This must be some kind of sick joke. You think and try to shake off the creepy feeling that's suddenly washed over you. But little do you know, you're about to find out how your friend got caught up in the nightmarish mystery of the most evil boarding house in American history. Welcome back to our channel. Here we bring you the craziest and most insane true crime mysteries. Some of the things discussed in this video may be triggering or disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. When the year 1984 rolled around, no one knew it would mark the beginning of a terrible nightmare. Not just for the people who entered the doors of 1426 F Street in Sacramento, California, but also for the police who would later enter the home, because they would find out that this house was something straight out of a horror movie. But what made this house any different than the others? The answer is simple. There was blood on the floorboards. Well, not literally. However, a lot of people lost their lives inside these four walls, and they lost their lives in the most painful way imaginable. And you won't believe what the house looked like on the outside. It looked like any normal house, maybe even a bit nicer than most houses in the area. In fact, people would say the home was beautiful. That's why when people went missing and police searched the home, they were surprised to find out that they couldn't get anyone to talk about it. To them, the house and its owner were very respectable. So when they heard about the investigation, they were taken aback. "I thought they were a good Christian person," one neighbor said. Another said, "She looks like the kind of person who'd never hurt a fly." And that's exactly what made the house so special, because the seemingly humble home was the setting for a series of disappearances that would shock the nation. It would take several months for people to realize that something dark was happening inside this house. But once they did, they wondered why no one had noticed before. So what happened in the house? To understand what happened, we need to take a look at the owner of the house. The owner of the house was a 53-year-old woman named Dorothea Puente. No one knows much about her past, but they say she had a rough childhood. Her father abandoned the family when Dorothy was very young, and her mother, rather than taking care of Dorothy and her brother, turned to drinking heavily. So basically, Dorothy had to raise herself. This is probably why Dorothy was so adamant on looking after the elderly and the sick. She understood what it felt like to not have anyone in life. And so she promised herself that she would never allow anyone to feel the way she felt. But unfortunately, she took this too far. She created an environment where she was in charge, and if anyone wanted to live under her roof, they had to abide by her rules. Not only that, people quickly realized that Dorothy liked to isolate her boarders from the outside world. She wanted them to spend more time inside the house than outside. Sometimes she would even drive them to hospitals to get treatment, and then pick them up later that same day. She was in control of everything her patients did. But why? The answer is simple: money. Dorothy charged $450 per month for a room and bed, and most of her patients only had around $700 to their name after paying rent. So basically, Dorothy was making a lot of money from exploiting the people who trusted her, but she wanted more. And so she began poisoning her boarders. Her preferred method was to use a strong sedative called Nembutal to keep her boarders asleep for long periods of time. Then she would simply wait until they stopped breathing and then bury them in her garden. Her favorite targets were the people who had pensions because they were rich, which meant Dorothy could buy a lot of the medication she needed to keep her business going. But once she ran out of pills, she used whatever she had lying around, like sleeping aids, painkillers, and anti-anxiety medications. For a while, she got away with murder. The police never even considered that something was happening in the house because it looked like such a nice place. But in 1988, a few neighbors started becoming suspicious of Dorothy and her activities. They saw her buying large quantities of cement at a nearby store and also noticed that the garden was missing. But Dorothy just brushed off these suspicions and continued with her life. Then something happened that finally drew attention to the house. A boarder of the house named Bert Montoya hadn't been seen in weeks. He usually sent money to his sister and he hadn't done that. Plus, his pension checks had also stopped clearing. Everyone began to wonder where he had gone. His sister contacted the police and they got a warrant to search Dorothy's house. When the police arrived at the door, Dorothy opened it with a smile and invited them in. She showed them the rooms, but the police still couldn't find Bert anywhere. Then they asked to see the garden. Dorothy hesitated, but eventually let them out back. The police began digging in the dirt and immediately found bones. Soon, they had found 7 bodies, all of them wrapped in cement and covered with soil. Dorothy had done it again. She had murdered again, and that's why none of her boarders were ever seen outside. She liked to keep them isolated. She didn't want them to have access to a phone so they couldn't call the outside world. She was living like a queen in the middle of her own personal hell, and nobody knew how long she had been doing this for. But Dorothy was finally caught. She was put on trial for her crimes and pleaded not guilty. She claimed she hadn't committed any murders and that all of the people in the courtroom were lying. She acted like nothing had happened and she was just a poor old woman who lost her boarders, but she couldn't hold up that facade for long. In court, the judge ruled that Dorothy should be held without bail, and a jury later found her guilty of 3 of the murders. She was given 3 life sentences and no parole. She died in prison in 2011, but the whole country was left wondering how many people Dorothy had actually killed. In the end, it didn't matter. All we knew is that the death house had finally closed its doors. But what do you think about this case? We'll see you in the comments. Most people agree that Dorothy was a narcissistic psychopath who thrived on power and control. She liked having her boarders under her thumb and she enjoyed watching them suffer. But others argue that she was just a lonely old woman who made mistakes. She had a rough childhood and just wanted to be loved. And even though her methods were wrong, her intentions were pure. What do you think? Do you agree with the first statement or the second? Tell us about it in the comments. Before we wrap up today's discussion, we want to give a big shout out to some viewers for their support. We appreciate your enthusiasm and passion for true crime. If you're a fan of the show and want to join our incredible community, here's how you can do it. Hit that subscribe button so you'll be notified every time we post a new video. Give us a thumbs up if you love the content we create. And make sure to leave us a comment with your thoughts or any suggestions you have for future videos. We love reading and responding to your comments. Thanks again for joining us today. We'll see you next time.